So just finished up having an amazing conversation with Faye Sheridan. She is a women's integrated health coach and has a business, the Cycle Sisters. And we delved into many topics to do with the menstrual cycle, menstrual dysfunction, looking at exercise, nutrition across the menstrual cycle, looking at blood work and things to be careful for with contraceptive pill and coming off the contraceptive pill. It was very informative, high value content. I would actually probably get a pen and paper to take some notes on this because it's that great, and it's information that a lot of females need to know about their body to become intuitive and become aware of their own body so they can take this away. I appreciate Faye for coming on. Her and Tony have always been amazing whenever I've caught up with them. They're a great bunch at Total Movement down in Subiaco over in Perth, Western Australia. And if you like the episode, subscribe below, leave a comment, leave us some reviews on Apple Podcast, and I look forward to hearing from you. Faye, thanks for jumping on. Really, just I guess at the very beginning of this, just I wanted you to introduce yourself, because I know that maybe over the last couple of years, there's been a bit of a transition from just going to a fitness health coach into a specialist role into helping women with the Cycle Sisters. And you're saying earlier that's taken off. And I just want to know kind of what the aim with that, where that came from, and what the aim of that is really, before we delve into topics about menstrual cycle and female health.
Yeah. So I've always had this, my background is personal training, and I always had this kind of, I intuitively tracked my clients' menstrual cycle without actually knowing the science behind it. I just knew that this thing happened once a month, and I knew that it impacted women. And so I tracked it, and, I would change their training if they would come in and have a one-on-one session with me, and I would ask where they are in their cycle. And then I would, adjust their training how they were feeling. If they were feeling like they were just about to get their period, then maybe we would avoid heavy lifting. Every client, every woman was different. So I started this 8 years ago without knowing any of the physiology behind it or anything like that. It's just very intuitive. And then probably about a couple of years after that, I started doing my own research. And back then there wasn't that much. It's only of recent years that there's books coming out, and there's amazing naturopaths like Lara Bryden doing amazing research on the menstrual cycle and menstrual cycle dysfunction. And then, like all great things that have happened in the past 18 months to 2 years with COVID, I really stepped into this women. I call myself a integrative health practitioner, women's integrative health practitioner. And that's where I take my kind of training and my personal training background and the nutrition, and then I integrate that with health, gut health, the menstrual cycle. And then when we're looking at the menstrual cycle, we can't just look at the menstrual cycle alone. When we're looking at dysfunction, we need to be looking at other areas like gut health, like stress, like the thyroid, because, as you know, Martin, the body doesn't work alone in one, compartment. So, it's just looking at all the cogs in the.
Okay, thanks. That's a nice summary, I think. There was two things that you mentioned there, and I want to delve into both of them. Obviously, the menstrual cycle itself, I really want this conversation to be able to resonate with some people who might not even know what it is. So, for example, my partner's 32 years to 31, she's going to hate me for this, 31 or 32 years old. And yesterday I said, what phase in your menstrual cycle are you? And she was like, I have no idea. And I think many, that's just perhaps a thought from that, but there might be many females out there who actually don't know what the phases are. And there was something that you put in your content the other day about inner seasons as well. And I was like, okay, I have no idea what it is. So if you could just take us through the menstrual cycle, what inner seasons are, and then we'll go on to what menstrual dysfunction is as well.
Yeah, awesome. So the menstrual cycle is made up of 4 different phases. And in those 4 different phases, there's hormones that are forever changing. And I'll take you through those phases. Now, it's not uncommon for women not to know this because we're never taught it at school. And I really do think that this should be part of, our sex education. Basically, we're told as young girls that we get this bleed once a month, just avoid getting pregnant. And so there's that fear monger of having this cycle, and that it can, all it's going to do is get us pregnant. And we can only really fall pregnant 6 days of our cycle. So we're only fertile for 24 to 48 hours, but sperm lives on for 5 days, and that's why we can be fertile for 6 days. So we're not fertile for that long, but the fertile window is usually 6 to 7 days. So the menstrual cycle, we have our period, which is our bleed. And I just want to do a little disclaimer here. If you're on contraceptive drugs, you do not experience a menstrual cycle. You're experiencing either a pill bleed or withdrawal bleed from that synthetic drug. It's not an actual menstrual cycle. So for those that aren't on any contraceptive drugs and they're experiencing a menstrual cycle, you have your bleed, which is your period. When you have your period, or leading into your period, your hormones are pretty much flatlined, and that's why most women feel lethargic, because there's no actual hormones that are ebbing and flowing in that part. And that bleed can last a normal bleed is anywhere from 2 to 7 days. Anything over 7 days is a little bit of a red flag, and anything under 2 days, I'd be looking at, why it's under 2 days and what the actual bleed is like. Because the amount of blood that they lose and the color of the blood can say a lot as well of overall health. And then as we come out of the bleed, we then go into the follicular phase. So the follicular phase is when we see this rise of estrogen. And this is where a woman is feeling like she's got a lot of energy. She's more like a man in this part of her cycle than she is, in the second half of her cycle. So this estrogen is amazing for energy. We have the ability to recover quicker in this part of our cycle when we're training. Our appetite is, we're not as ravenous in this part of our cycle, because estrogen does suppress appetite a little bit. And also we can tolerate carbohydrates a lot better in this part of our cycle. So we're more insulin sensitive in this part of our cycle, whereas in the second part, we're more insulin resistant. And then once we get this kind of follicular phase, we get this spike of estrogen, it's on the rise. We then see a spike in follicle stimulating hormone, and we also see a spike in luteinizing hormone. And that luteinizing hormone is probably, it's important, because without this spiking, we won't ovulate. And so it's really important that we have luteinizing hormone. So once luteinizing hormone spikes, ovulation occurs, and ovulation is the release of the egg. And after ovulation and the release of the egg, where the egg is released from, we then form this thing called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is super important, because that's what produces progesterone for women. And progesterone is so, so important. It's like a super hormone. And the reason why it's so important is that it is it's our body's own antidepressant. It's a very calming hormone. It's our body's own anti-inflammatory as well. So it can, it has all these perks. And so when I'm running into menstrual cycle dysfunction, I see a lot of women not ovulating, and that's why they're running into menstrual cycle dysfunction.
Okay.
And so we only have access to progesterone and estrogen in our prime reproductive years. And as we get older, our estrogen starts to slowly decline. And then as we go into perimenopause, our progesterone just plummets like that. So I always say to women, get these amazing hormones while you can, because they are, progesterone has been shown to have huge positive impact on cognitive function. And it's been shown in research that women who don't ovulate or who have been on the pill are more susceptible to things like Alzheimer's, because they haven't been exposed to progesterone. Okay. So it's a super important hormone, and it's really hard to ovulate for women. So, and that's because stress gets, whether it be physical, emotional, like environmental stress can impact ovulation. And then after ovulation occurs, we then go into what we call the luteal phase. And the luteal phase is where women struggle the most usually. I mean, you shouldn't, the side effects and the PMS that we talk about, it's not normal. It's common, very, very common, but it's not normal for women to feel these various symptoms. And so what's happening in the luteal phase is that we see the spike of progesterone and we see a little bit of a spike of estrogen. And then as we go back into our bleed, it then goes back down again. Hope I've explained that okay.
No, that was great. So obviously
and it starts all over again.
Yeah, so it's the progesterone and the increase in the progesterone and the estrogen that's actually helping with the ovulation, and then post ovulation it starts to come down again. That's where the line of the uterus is then obviously taken away through the bleed, and that's where the egg is. So
estrogen is the dominant hormone in the first half of the cycle, and then after ovulation occurs, progesterone is made after ovulation.
Yeah, I think I did a post on research. They were looking at the levels of estrogen and progesterone in sleep, and I think it was the progesterone levels that were causing more stage 3 sleep, those who had higher progesterone, which makes sense with the antidepressant like effect that it has. And also with the mention that you say later on in life where females have less progesterone, that it was very common for me to see 45, 50-year-old females who all of a sudden get real poor sleep, and they're like, what's going on? And there's even potentially links with sleep apnea as well occurring around that phase, especially with a premenopausal things going on during that period. So that hormonally makes sense to me. So what is kind of, you said it's not normal to feel all these different symptoms. So what kind of symptoms are you talking about, and what kind of would be the normal physical and emotional changes throughout those phases that women should expect, and ones to maybe look out for?
Yeah, so common things that I see with women and they're not normal is things like severe cramping that lasts for more than a couple of hours. If it lasts more than a couple of hours and it lasts days, then that's not normal. Heavy bleeding is not normal. Light bleeding is not normal. Headaches and migraines are not normal leading into your period. There are changes in your gut and the motility, like progesterone does impact motility for gut health, but you shouldn't have super loose stools, or you shouldn't get constipated, which is another common thing that I see with women. What's another one? Acne is another one. So hormonal acne, I see a lot of. Mood swings, severe mood swings, like, I've seen it with women, like just this feeling of hopelessness or depression and anxiety is another one in that luteal phase. So my first thing whenever I'm working with women is I make sure that they are ovulating first. So that's my first thing that I look at.
Okay. Yeah. And obviously with that, those sort of, there's an array of different things that could be occurring there. I don't, if you want to touch on just a few, I guess, some of the things that they should be maybe monitoring or changing their life, or how do they monitor other than those emotional feelings? Is there any way physically they can monitor things? I know there's apps that people can use where they can be checking whether in certain phases. Is there any recommendations that you would give around that?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is, like, women just need to get educated on the menstrual cycle first, and then start looking at, as a woman, we have our own, I mean, we're amazing. Like, it just blows my mind, the biomarkers, our own biomarkers that we have that happen around ovulation and in the menstrual cycle that we can use to predict our fertile window, but also to understand that we've ovulated as well. So just before ovulation, we will create this mucus. It's called cervical mucus, and it's like egg white. So it's like, that's the best way I can explain it. It's kind of like a plug, like it'll come loose, and you can hold it in your fingers like this, and it'll be stringy, kind of egg white.
Okay.
And so that's a sign that ovulation is about to occur. And then we use cervical mucus, and then we use our basal body temperature. So after we ovulate, our basal body temperature will usually go up by about 0.3 to 0.5. And this kind of confirms ovulation with our cervical mucus. Our cervix also changes position throughout our menstrual cycle as well. So when we ovulate, our cervix sits quite high. And then when we bleed, our cervix sits quite low. And estrogen and progesterone play the role of moving the cervix.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah,
And
it's starting to make sense
it's
starting to make sense when I've heard people say, my partner or other people say it feels different. The people in it's like what they're feeling. My partner's just currently literally it's her first month off the contraceptive pill, so it's like I think there's obviously a lot that's going to be changing and going on in her body that she's all of a sudden and she's starting to feel a little bit anxious of it already. And this is also one of the reasons why I did want to talk to you, so she can listen to it after. And I know that you've got some solid advice. So sorry, I interrupted you where you're at with there. So do you want to?
Yeah, so they're the kind of biomarkers that we can look at, to understand where we are if we're in our fertile window, and also just paying attention to our moods and emotions as well. So moods, emotions, they do change throughout our cycle, but they shouldn't be kind of extreme, if that makes sense. So in our follicular phase, when estrogen is quite high, I kind of call this the masculine part of the cycle, because it's a very doing part of the cycle. We're high energy, we are communicative, we're social, we can give a lot. Whereas in the second half of our phase, I call this the feminine part of the menstrual cycle. This is where we need to be just more in flow and more nurturing to ourselves. But this is the part where women get hard on themselves. That inner critic comes out a lot harder for women in this time. This is when women, usually speaking, they start to pick holes in themselves because their body does change. They might start holding more water, or they feel a bit more sluggish, or they don't feel as strong in the gym or something like that. So women tend to get a lot really hard on themselves in this part of the cycle. But when you know what's going on, I feel like women can be more empathetic towards themselves, more compassionate with what their body's actually doing. So that's the kind of way I like to break it up. I say that estrogen is this yang hormone and progesterone is this very yin hormone, and we need both of them.
It kind of reminded me a little bit of the book Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus, sort of kind of I read that maybe 4 years ago, and I learned so much about females from there. But would you, as the ideal partner, as the opposite, would you say that when a female is in her feminine, then the male should be more in his masculine to try and balance that out between a relationship, or would you say that if a woman's in her feminine, the male also should be in that zone as well? Is there any, have you thought about that at all?
I've never thought about that. I don't think that I think that women should communicate with their partner where they are in their cycle, because men can, be more compassionate as well and empathetic towards their partner, and understand where they are at. So I've never really looked at it how a man should if he should change as such, but I think definitely the communication needs to be there with your partner, because once you communicate with them, if you snap or if you kind of are more assertive and directive, they'll know that, okay, she's, this is where she is in her cycle. For me, I go inward, and it's definitely a time to go inward for a woman in this part of their cycle. And I don't think women do that enough. It's a very reflective time. I like to use my bleed as a reflective time on the month that's been. And I think a lot of women don't honor that. And that's why we run into things like burnout and menstrual cycle dysfunction. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's, look, I had a question. One of the very last questions I was going to ask is how can I be more supportive as a partner, sort of thing. So I think just as someone who loves physiology, I already know when my partner's bleeding, I kind of count the weeks or the 7 days in my head, and I kind of know, but even though she's on the contraceptive was on the contraceptive pill, I'm like, okay, well, every now and then I'll be checking in. And now she's off it, I'm checking in to make sure that we don't have unprotected sex when she's at the most fertile and things like that. I'm just aware of it and understand. I'm communicating that with her to kind of educate it a bit more as well. But you mentioned earlier on a little bit about insulin sensitivity around certain periods and that increases in changes and how exercise can increase and change and how you would program a female's training around and nutrition around those sort of things. Is there just a couple of things? So obviously insulin sensitivity is related to carbohydrate intakes. So there's always discussion about carbohydrates because it gets blown up like all the macronutrients to say that it's bad for you. And it's not. We know that the carbohydrate is not itself, but we know that insulin sensitivity plays a factor in weight gain and how our bodies are going to react in tiredness and fatigue and things like that. So maybe just touch a little bit on how you would slightly change someone's training and slightly change their nutrition in just a couple of the phases and or just where they can differ completely. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, so with the, women are going to tolerate carbohydrates better in the first half of their cycle, but that's not to say that you would change the carbohydrate intake in the second part of their cycle, because the central nervous system is impacted quite a lot in the second half of the cycle due to the stress and the changes of the hormones. So we still need carbohydrates then, but we just may hold more water or we may look puffier, if that makes sense. But that's not to say that I would ever alter someone's carbohydrate intake in that second half of the phase, because we know carbohydrates can help with things like sleep as well, and sleep sometimes gets heavily impacted in that luteal phase. The only time I would look at altering
I'm laughing
carbohydrate,
because my partner's, she's in that phase and she's not sleeping too well at the moment. I was like, it just makes sense now.
Yeah. Get those carbs, get those slow release carbs before you go to bed. That's what I kind of like tell my clients to aim for. But also, where was I going with that? I don't really change carbohydrates. The only time I would change carbohydrates is if someone had PCOS, because PCOS is driven by high amounts of insulin. So polycystic ovary syndrome is there's a couple of different types of PCOS, but the main one is insulin resistance. And so we need to look at, I would never fully take away carbohydrates from a woman, but I would look at maybe potentially timing of carbohydrates, lowering carbohydrates a little bit for that woman. So that's when you would maybe play around with carbohydrates a little bit more for someone that has PCOS, with other things as well, like supplementation. But we do tolerate fats a little bit better in that luteal phase. So you can play with it, but I don't like to play with nutrition on a week-to-week basis with women. It's not sustainable. It's not, you're already stressed if you're in that luteal phase. You don't need added stress to that. So but with that comes training and exercise. And so what I say to women in the first half of their phase, this is where you want to be hitting PBs in the gym. This is where you can take volume, intensity to the next level. And then once you come into this luteal phase, every woman is different. I don't change my training whatsoever in my menstrual cycle. Yes, I may be sweating more, or I may feel a little bit weaker and my grip strength goes, but I can still hit PBs in that luteal phase. I also have been training for a very long time, so that may be part of it as well. And I'm very in tune with my body. So, but for those women that need to pull back in their luteal phase, this is when maybe you might pull back on volume and intensity. So you still might do your workout, you just might change, volume, intensity, that kind of stuff. More like you always want to be focusing on recovery, but maybe focus a little bit more on recovery in that luteal phase. Awesome. So in the first half, put your foot on the gas, go for it. On the second part of the cycle, just be mindful. This is what I give women the tools to connect with their menstrual cycle, and then they become empowered to make the choices of how they train and how they eat. So
of course, you don't want to have to feed them everything all the time. And also, again, it's about intuition. It's about learning about your own body. It's about being aware of it all the time. So you're in tune. Like you say, you've been training for, how long have you been training for? 10, 15 years?
15 probably.
Yeah, exactly. So like when you go into the gym, you're so in tune with knowing exactly what you're able to do that you hardly have to really think about it other than just looking at your programming or what your coaches programmed you. But if someone is never paid attention to the phases of their menstrual cycle and what that does emotionally, physically, like to their nutrition, their bloating, their symptoms, like they have no idea. But if you've done 12 weeks, 16 weeks of coaching, and all of a sudden you're left to go off on your own, it's potentially it's life-changing stuff that you're doing there with women. So
and I have a prime example of a situation that happened with someone like 2 weeks ago. She was 2 days out from her bleed. I have given her a program. She's meant to follow my program, but she did this YOLO kind of workout the day before her deadlifts, and it was a strongman workout that she did. And so she was 2 days out from her period. She did this strongman workout, and then next day she did a deadlift session, and she hurt her back. Ooh. So, and she had bloating, and she's had gut issues as well. So I'm like, okay, where are you at in your cycle? Lo and behold, she was 2 days out away from her bleed. She had a shit night's sleep. She hadn't fueled her body well. She'd been drinking alcohol as well. And, all these things that kind of make training hard anyway. If you've had bad sleep and alcohol, on top of that, she's got low hormones as well. And so she's in a world of pain at the moment, but well, these things happen. It's very common. And then I always ask a woman when she gets injured, where is she in her cycle? And it's usually around just before the period. Also, it can happen around ovulation. So there's been lots of research about like ACL injuries around ovulation, because there's that change of hormones and it causes laxity in the joints as well and in the soft tissue. So there are common injuries that can happen around ovulation as well.
Yeah, okay. So that's why you're backing off slightly with the volume, intensity, maybe cutting back a little bit during that phase, because just reducing risks.
Yeah, I mean, it again comes down to training age and experience, I think. But that it can, ovulation, you can be more susceptible to soft tissue injury. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, so I wanted to move on to, I wouldn't say a controversial subject, but the contraceptive pill in general. Obviously, I don't think there's been too much education from GPs, doctors, when they hand it out. And I know that my partner's been on it since the age of 13, and she's now 30, 31 or 32. And it's like, wow, okay, have you ever really had a true menstrual cycle sort of thing? And what are the risks, I guess, with it? What's your opinion on it? What's the science say? And then we'll delve into coming off it.
Yeah. So I'm not a fan of birth control, whether it be the pill, whether it be the Implanon, whether it be injections. There's so many different types of things. That said, I do understand why women go on it, because it's scary, as being a woman and not wanting to fall pregnant. You want something that is going to be, what's the word? It's there's no risk there's a risk with it, but that it's going to work and you're not going to fall pregnant most of the time. And so I understand why women want to go on it. What I don't understand, and I wish that doctors would get more educated on it, is that hormonal birth control is being used not for birth control, but for fixing hormone issues. And that's what I have a very strong, it's a problem. So when a woman comes to me, I always ask her, why did you go on birth control to begin with? And more often than not, it's not because they were trying to avoid pregnancy, it's because they were having hormonal issues at a young age. And that comes with implications, because when a woman is first menstruating or it starts to experience her first menstrual cycle, hormonal imbalances are actually quite normal. And so those hormonal imbalances are heavy bleeds and irregular cycles. And this is when doctors are putting them on birth control. But this is when the brain is communicating with the ovaries and it is maturing that pathway between the brain, the hypothalamus, and the ovaries to signal to release certain hormones to then produce estrogen, progesterone, and ovulation. So it's shutting down that communication pathway, and it's not allowing that communication pathway to mature, which can take up to 5 years.
Wow.
And so from what I've read, I'm still trying to find research to back this, but I've read it, but I need to look into this a little bit more. But I have heard that it takes 5 years to mature. So there's that. And yeah, it's why that woman went, I was saying, so the irregular cycles and the heavy bleeding is usually because a woman, when she first starts menstruating, she's not experiencing ovulation. So estrogen thickens the lining of the uterus, and progesterone thins the lining of the uterus. And so if we don't have progesterone and we're just getting that thickening of the uterus, when we shed the lining of the uterus, it's quite thick and heavy, because progesterone it's not there to thin it. But that's normal for a young woman. It takes a few cycles for her to start having a ovulatory cycle. And she also might experience long cycles. So like a normal cycle is 21 to 35 days, but a young woman who is first menstruating, it can be 45 days, it can be 50 days. And so that's normal, but doctors are saying it's not normal, and then putting them on these drugs to regulate their hormones, which blows my mind, because these drugs aren't regulating hormones, it's suppressing hormones. It's shutting down luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, and then our ovaries aren't producing estrogen and progesterone. So it's actually shutting everything down. But it gives us this bleed every 28 days. And so when a woman is bleeding, she thinks she's having a period if she's not educated on the menstrual cycle. So this pill is being over kind of prescribed for the wrong things. So
so it's almost like puffers for asthma and for sleeping pills for sleep problems. It's like
100%.
Okay, this issue could be related to your hormones. The teenager gets upset, the GP just literally wants them to give them something to get them out the door again and get the next person in. So it's like, hey, well, this is just a common thing we do as GPs. Everyone does it, so I'm going to do it for you as well, and not without really assessing the situation.
Another common one is skin for women as well. So they start getting acne, and so hey, we'll put you on the pill, because the pill suppresses our sebum oil production, and as well as everything else, and their skin clears up and they love it. And I get that, because it can knock your confidence, but we know that skin is a sign that something else isn't quite right, going on inside. So
so coming off it, if you've been on it for a long period, what sort of things should you be mindful of? Like the skin thing you're talking about there, should you be worried about like getting acne again and stuff like that? What would you watch out for in terms of not things that number one, things that might happen but not to worry about, and number two, things to be mindful of that could be a little bit of a concern?
So don't be concerned if your cycle doesn't go back to normal for the first 3 to 6 months. It can take time for your cycle to regulate. In saying that, I came off the pill and fell pregnant within 4 weeks. Oh, wow. So there's that side of things as well. So, every woman is different. So we need to treat women as individuals. But what I do recommend is that you get blood work done. And by getting the blood work done, we can pick up on nutrient deficiencies, which nutrient deficiencies that are common with taking birth control is things like B vitamin, lack of B vitamins. I see that a lot. Magnesium and zinc gets depleted heavily by OCPs. Selenium is another one. And yeah, we need to be replacing these nutrients and making sure that, because these nutrients are vital for reproduction and to be ovulating. And so we need to replenish our body. And then something, if you went on the pill because you had heavy bleeds, or you went on the pill because you had acne, it's probably going to come back, because the pill has just masked it's a Band-Aid. So if you went on for your skin, I can probably guarantee that it's going to come back, if not tenfold. Like, it's probably going to get worse. And so you need to still address underlying potentially nutrient deficiencies or gut health issues as well. So why did you have acne in the first place?
Okay.
That said, you can support if you don't want to come off of it straight away. Like, I have done a protocol for a lady before where we've supported her with zinc, and we've supported her with magnesium and B vitamins. And then 3 months later, she came off the pill, and her skin, because she went on it for her skin. And so we've kind of supported her with some of these nutrients. And then she came off the pill, and it was nowhere near as bad.
Okay. So. Is there like a time frame? Say if someone comes off it, and like, when would you expect to start experiencing these sort of things again? Or say if you got to month 3 and you're okay, is that like you're in the clear? That, like, just, I guess, well, you've said something that could be quite. Someone might listen and go, "Oh crap! Like, I'm just going to go back onto the pill again." I guess to kind of clear that, to make someone maybe feel a bit more. Something to be more aware of.
Yeah. So your cycle should definitely start to regulate like 3 months. At the 3-month mark, I'd be looking at, yes, I'm getting a regular cycle and I'm starting to ovulate. Anything after that, I'd be a bit worried about. Like, I'd look a bit deeper, dive a bit deeper into blood work. If it's skin, I've had a few different scenarios with women. So some women have come off the pill and immediately started to get like this cystic acne around the jaw. And then I've had a lady also that's been off of it for 3 months, had 3 cycles, her skin was fine, and then boom, her skin got really bad, and she was and then lost her period for 6 months. Okay. So it really, it's hard to say. It's so variable. Yeah, it really does come down to the individual.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, that's just something for people to be mindful of, and if they know that they come across that experience, then to reach out to yourself. So, look, I think that's been a highly valuable conversation for me and for many of the women out there. So we'll end it there. But with people who do want to reach out to you, or how they can find about your coaching, where would they need to look, and how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram. My business name is called Cycle Sisters, so at Cycle Sisters. And you can reach out via my Instagram. The link is in my bio. And yeah, I try and keep that very educational, my Cycle Sisters page. And I also offer a 8-week online course, which is it's just basically education on women's health. It's not just the menstrual cycle, but it's also gut health and, the feminine and the masculine energy, and living in alignment with your values. Like, all of these things come into, and perimenopause and menopause. Like, women are very cyclical beings. We are forever changing. And it's just a course where I just educate women to hopefully empower them to connect with their cycle and get to the root cause of their PMS. So
awesome. Yeah. It's no wonder it's taken off for you, and you're obviously doing a grand job at it, and it's also an area that needs more knowledge and education around. So I appreciate you for doing that for the women out there.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Faye. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
As always. And when I'm back in Perth, I'm sure I'll catch you.